Welcome to Topic 1, where we will learn about strengths and recommendations in detail. Just to remind you where we are, this is where you can enter the strengths of regulatory functions in the computerized GBT. The strengths highlight the positive internal factors, tangible achievements, and successful elements within the regulatory functions. These strengths serve as a baseline for future development and are intended to be adopted as best practices. They underline traits such as commitment, motivation, transparency, integrity, leadership, and high efficiency in specific fields. It is crucial that strengths are emphasized with the same importance as used for weaknesses. On the other hand, if the score for any regulatory sub-indicator does not say implemented, it means that there is an area for improvement or a gap. In such a case, it is mandatory to include at least one recommendation or IDP in the tool. This recommendation should be directly linked to the root cause identified for the specific gap that needs to be addressed. You should ensure that the recommendation focuses on addressing only one subject and one scope. It is also important to keep in mind that the recommendation should outline a specific activity to be performed rather than stating an objective to be achieved. This is the location in the CGBT where you can input an IDP. When the score is different from implemented, the tool will automatically display a reminder in red to underline that at least one recommendation should be added to address the causes of low scoring. Sometimes, more than one recommendation is needed under the same sub-indicator to address the identified gaps. On the other side, a recommendation can also be given in case of full implementation of a sub-indicator to suggest improvements. By clicking on the Add button, you will have access to the IDP page, where mandatory fields are indicated with a red asterisk. These fields encompass not only the recommendation, but also specify the type of activity recommended, such as the development of a new document or the requirement for additional resources or training. The status, which may be proposed, ongoing, or planned, and the expected time for implementation. Don't forget, to provide effective and acceptable recommendations, it is always advisable to work in close collaboration with the NRA. For the recommendations to be effective, they should adhere to the SMART criteria, ensuring they are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. The recommendations must be specific, with well-defined actions targeting identified gaps. Remember, only an evidence-based gap whose root cause has been identified can lead to a specific recommendation. They should be measurable for monitoring and assessment. The NRA's capacity for attainability and compliance must be considered. The recommendations must be relevant to the expected improvement. They must be time-bound and in line with the IDP's implementation timeframe. It is important to underline that there are two types of recommendations that can be provided: mandatory recommendations and suggested recommendations. Mandatory recommendations include activities that are necessary for achieving the full score of a specific sub-indicator, while suggested recommendations consist of supplementary activities that can be implemented for improvement but are not necessary. They do not impact the score of the sub-indicator. It's worth noting that fully implemented sub-indicators may contain suggested recommendations, which can contribute to continuous improvement efforts. It is advisable to clearly specify the type of recommendation under the assessor input. The collection of all recommendations to improve different areas constitutes the Institutional Development Plan, which is an important outcome of the benchmarking process. It is the work plan outlining the proposed activities for each regulatory function, and serves as the foundation for improvement and monitoring progress. The IDP is to be completed within a timeline agreed upon with the WHO, typically spanning 2 to 3 years. It consists of recommendations aimed at addressing the identified gaps and suggestions on how to sustain strengths. The IDP includes specific fields which state the priority, milestones, and deadlines for the activities, the responsible institutions and officers accountable for implementing them, and the estimation of the funding required, along with the potential sources for the same.